So we start with some introductions and some explanations. So good evening to you all, and tēnā koutou. A very warm welcome to this Meet the Candidates online event for the LAKES-MURCHISON ward. So I'm David Bartle. I'm co-hosting tonight with Joanna Santa Barbara, and we are both from the Nelson Tasman Climate Forum, which is a community group who facilitate local action to help address climate crisis issues. We've organised these meetings in partnership with the Tasman Environmental Trust, a conservation dedicated group working across the whole of the top of the south. So we're hosting these meetings with candidates from every ward and also with the mayoral candidates. So Joanna will start us with a karakia. Thank you, Joanna.
Okay, this karakia expresses the following sentiments. For this gathering, seek knowledge for great. Okay.
My apologies.
No worries. For this gathering, seek knowledge for understanding, have purpose in all you do, stand tall, be strong, let's show respect for each other. E te whānau hui, whaia te mātauranga kia marama. Kia whai take ngā mahi katoa. Tū maya, tū kaha. Aroha atu, aroha mai. Tātou I a tātou katoa.
Welcome, everyone.
Thank you, David.
We're hosting these meetings because we think you, the council members and members-elects, have such a vital role on local action to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to help us adapt to the changes ahead. So we've invited our councillors to explain how you will help our communities to respond to what we see as a worsening crisis of climate. And we think this is a crucial time for this country, for Aotearoa New Zealand, as we move towards the milestones agreed by the government to almost halve our emissions. At the same time, we're fighting a biodiversity crisis with loss of habitat, destruction of invasive species, and increasing climate impacts on our biodiversity. We wish to hear how candidates here tonight intend taking on these unprecedented challenges once elected. A few words about procedure. So our session tonight will run till 8:30, and in this first hour, we'll have some pre-prepared questions. These questions have been compiled in collaboration with the Tasman Environmental Trust, who have co-hosted several of the meetings. Candidates have received these questions beforehand. Mostly, I've fiddled with one. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond to each question, and we do ask you to try to stick to time, and we will interrupt with times up if necessary. So please respect the fact that participants have joined because they want to hear your views on climate and on biodiversity in particular. If you don't wish to answer a question, just say so. And as mentioned, we're recording this session, and it together with other sessions will be available for people to hear on our website. So in the last 25 or 30 minutes, we'll be inviting candidates to take questions from the floor, and we'll pick those from the chat box, which is at the bottom of the screen. So we're inviting members of the public to enter questions you would like addressed in the chat box, and Joanna and I will pick them up at the right time. So I will now, my pleasure to introduce the candidates. So tonight we've got Sharon Rogers and Stuart Bryant.
Good evening.
And Richard Osbiston.
Good evening.
And I don't think Dean has joined us. So Dean is another candidate for council in this ward, but I don't think is here tonight. So we'll go now to the first question, which Joanna is going to propose to you.
Hey, so in the first question, we really want you to introduce yourselves. Tell us who you are and what are your outstanding credentials in the arena of action on climate and biodiversity. And we'll start with Sharon.
Kia ora. Sharon Rogers of Ngāpuhi descent. I have lived in Tapawera for 40 years and taught science at the local school for much of that. I farm with my partner and his father on a beef fattening and cropping unit. We irrigate, we use Roundup and synthetic nitrogen fertiliser. I believe organic, regenerative and grass-fed are terms that have become so greenwashed and commercialised that they effectively mean nothing. I would never vote or donate to Greenpeace. I do not like propaganda in emotive language. So in many ways, I could quite possibly be your worst environmental nightmare. But I do have a BSc in zoology, and I'm focused on ecology and freshwater ecology in particular. So that's a passion of mine. We have a low stocking rate. We minimise water and fertiliser use, mostly due to economics. We don't use pre-emergence and will only use insecticides and herbicides if very necessary. We riparian plant, and I support the Motueka Catchment Collective. I have run trap lines with the students of Tapawera School up the Wongapeka to protect the Whio for 10 plus years now, and we're heading up on Wednesday again, hopefully if the weather behaves. And I wish the children of the future can swim in and drink out of our rivers with impunity, like I did. So I see climate issues from a range of lenses, and really I just want a good world.
Thanks.
Thanks, Sharon. On to Stuart.
Thank you, Joanna. Stuart Bryant, current LAKES-MURCHISON Ward Councillor and Deputy Mayor, and also a farmer. And I'll just predominantly talk about that firstly. So we, Joanna and I and our families, when they were with us, lived very fugitely and lived so that we try not to create too much waste. We have a strong emphasis on pasture management so that we can have good, strong pasture. We use we use fertiliser that is recommended blended for our own needs. We have a strong pasture from that fertiliser that we use to suppress weeds. The word I wanted is formulated specially for us, and that with that we have a very strong pasture that enables us to use very little weed spray or glyphosate or anything like that. They do a bit of spot spraying, or gorse is our main enemy on the hill, which we really have a passion about getting rid of that, and usually we cut and paint the stumps. Occasionally we have used the helicopter for spraying barberries and hawthorns, which can be a bit challenging. We're really strong on water conservation. We monitor our water usage. We have a meter on our water pumps for our stock and domestic use, so we know each day how much water we're using. And we also have monitors on our tanks that tell us what level they're at, so that we don't, if there is a breakage in the system, we know immediately, so we can save water. Like Sharon, we do also irrigate here at Wakefield, and once again, we're very conservative about that. We try and do it as efficiently as possible. And so the other thing we've done is we've allowed the cycleway to go across the front of our property. We repurposed most of the older materials from that fence to fence off waterways on our property, and which we have other farmers visit, particularly during the dog trials. So we like to think that some of these things we're doing, fencing our main drains and waterways with 2 wires as required, we can show other farmers that lead the way. And some of the other things I will cover off as we go through the other questions, because I see I'm at 2.5 minutes, so thank you.
Oh, your timekeeper's being pretty generous to you.
Thank you.
We'll go to Richard now.
Great, thanks, Joanna. Good evening, everybody. Oh, it looks like you're at one end of the spectrum, Sharon. Stu's somewhere in the middle. and we're organic vegetarians at the other end. So we've been here on it's only 100 acres up at Lake Rediwedi, where it's mostly rocks and swamp, you know. And we used to farm pigs and beef, but frankly never got very far with that. And as the children grew up, we struggled with the ethics of killing all our pets, you know. And now all our animals, I mean, to be frank, we never actually made any money anyway, to be honest, you know, ups and downs. But so it's a lot more peaceful place now, where all the animals are retired and they're rescue animals, and we don't kill anything. We make a bit of hay, but that's the only product that we produce on the farm, and we've been hand weeding that for 18 years. So yeah, I can assure you there's no thistles or ragwort out there through many years of patient wandering around. We do, as regards climate stuff, I mean, we do a lot of miles, of course, because we live so far from, you know, the main centers of civilization, which is not great, and I don't see any immediate solutions to that. It's not great at all. And of course, in a past life, I was an airline pilot. So, you know, I spent 20 years flying around the world, taking people mostly on holiday to consume things, and don't feel good about that at all, actually. And this current election cycle, I'm traveling around the top of the South Island from Fox Glacier to Picton in my 12-meter bus, which consumes a lot of diesel. And I actually feel dreadful about that. But hopefully the cause makes it worthwhile, as we have, I think, bigger fish to fry, and we're having a huge push to actually push us into really the next paradigm where these climate issues, I think we can actually solve relatively easily.
Thanks.
The current trajectory has no solutions at all. Thanks, David. Great.
Okay, I'll pass over to David for the next question, and I'll be the timekeeper, perhaps slightly less generous than David.
Well, that's right. Be warned. Some of our questions relate to bigger things across the whole region, because of course you're both representing the ward, but also all of us in the whole of Tasman district. So I hope you'll accommodate me as we go through these questions. So the climate crisis clearly requires an urgent and significant change in how we live if we're going to effectively address it. Please describe a climate relevant change that you would launch through the council in the next 3 years. So it could be, for example, waste, urban intensification, or energy, or something else. So I'm going to start, please, with Stuart. Stuart,
Yeah, thank you, David. I'll have to watch that. I'm notorious for that.
No worries, no worries.
So, you know, something I'm really enthusiastic about, and in this term, through being on the Joint Landfill Committee, we have reduced the emissions from the landfill by flaring the gas from the landfill at Eves Valley and using it for heating the hospital. But one of the problems we do have at the landfill is batteries in the landfill. And this is one of the things that I will launch during the next term, hopefully, if elected. And I've already started down this path. In other areas, we have little deposit depots that are usually built by Men Shared or something like that as a voluntary organisation. With these little depots, you'll be able to pop your batteries in them from your computer, any battery pad device like laptops, torches, whatever, and they will be out of the landfill. And hoping to launch that in Tapawera in the first year of the new term, because it's a low socioeconomic community and has no actual recycling facility. So if we can get something like these depots built, I think that would be a great way. Huranui in their first 12 months have kept 0.5 ton of batteries out of the landfill, and that's huge for us, those of us on the landfill committee, because there is a huge risk of a fire starting in the landfill from a battery. So that would be my plan.
Thank you, Stuart.
Brilliant. Richard, tell us what you would do as a member of this ward to,
Yep, I have quite a lot to do with the council already as the chair of Lake Rotary Hall Committee, and I make submissions everywhere, all over the top of the South Island. So I have a lot to do with long-term plans and strategic plans and things. But it would be absolutely fantastic to be on the inside rather than on the outside looking in. And I mean, the council and, you know, our current society is a huge machine that takes time to redirect. And with the concepts that we've been studying for the last 10 years about alternative economic systems, we can see the potential to completely turn around our climate and biodiversity crisis. But I appreciate that this will take time for people to get on board. I've been doing it for 10 years and a lot of people have come on board, and now the urgency and the need for this is becoming more and more evident, I mean, almost daily. So I think it really is time to actually introduce this topic and some seriously outside of the box thinking, and rather than have a "this is all we can do" approach, to actually say what must we do and do that, and without excuses. And of course, I'm referring to the economic system, which is currently an excuse for basically inaction, or even worse, our economic system is the reason we're causing climate harm in the first place. Yeah, I'll stop there, David, if you're...
thank you. Thank you very much. So Sharon, please tell us what you would do on this question of changing the way we do things through the council.
First of all, I'd like to congratulate Stuart for, you know, getting onto the landfill. Well done. It really needs to be sorted out. And certainly the rural recycling streams, I really would like to get a bit more of an efficient system that they're really all getting collected. But actually, I have a much bigger think big scheme. Actually, I think we lose huge amounts of electrical energy just by the transmission of power. It makes no sense that we have a giant dam on the doorstep of a growing, aging population and do not utilise its power production potential. Firstly, I would ensure that the dam doesn't get included in the Three Waters infrastructure handover. It's irrigation and freshwater system, so I can't see why it would. I'm presuming it comes under the Ministry of Environment. And then we would need to find a pathway for that dam to meet its power production potential. Even if that involves a partnership deal, it is unacceptable that such a huge source of green energy not be utilised. The government could, of course, also come to the party. But, you know, it's way better than firing up Huntley. That, you know, it's a giant dam. We haven't had one around for a long time. We need to use it.
You're referring to the Lee Valley Dam, aren't you?
Absolutely, yes. Otherwise
known as the Waimea Dam or whatever, you know.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's the dam I'm talking about. It's one of the bigger projects any ward's taken on, well, council's taken on for a long time, and it should be making power.
Thank you very much for that. And so we'll go to the next question now. Thank you.
Okay, next question is on transport. And about 90% of our local carbon emissions, our local carbon dioxide emissions are from transport. What will you specifically do to help reduce transport emissions, building on what TDC has done so far? And the first crack at this one goes to Richard.
Yep, thanks, Joanna. Transport. Two things that come to mind. I mean, we've come a vastly long way in our capacity to measure our transport emissions and look really closely at the logistics of transport and the technology of transport and what the total cost and effect of transport is. So we've got a lot of data now that we never had before. I would really like to be looking at what is the purpose of that transport. And really, again, we're coming back to a spaceship management mentality. Is that transport actually necessary for the well-being of humankind? And when you ask those kind of questions, we do come out with a very different conclusion. And, you know, my family were dairy farmers. I've got lots of friends who are dairy farmers. But at the end of the day, what is the purpose of dairy? As an example, there's plenty of other examples in New Zealand. Wine, logging are the same. basically their fundamental purpose is to get monetary tokens. And monetary tokens, we cannot breathe or eat them. So if it's damaging the environment or survivability, then maybe we should consider a system that doesn't involve monetary tokens. You know, we've got to look at that bigger picture now. I know we can't change it straight away. We probably do have a little bit of time, especially if we've got a very bright light at the end of the tunnel. Thanks.
Thank you. Sharon now.
I support implementation of walking and cycling, the walking and cycling strategy, and yeah, go the fleet of hybrid cars. But I do not see that lithium and hydrogen powered options of the present time are actually particularly environmentally viable. I hope for greater innovation to come in the not too distant future. Farmers wait for the arrival of the electric ute, but the jury is still out on those. And certainly I'm not too keen to take an electric car through the rolling junction forward. So I think on the whole, humanity's got a lot to think about when it comes to transport, because at the moment we're just replacing one polluting system with another. Generally, I think we just have to stop moving around so much. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. And on to Stuart.
Thank you, Joanna. I think the thing that I would aim towards is, and we've already got this started in place, so if you've already heard it, my apologies, but it will take a little bit of implementing. We're hoping to have public transport passenger service using electric buses from July 1, 2023. And I'll just explain that will be more buses running between Nelson and Richmond more frequently, and also electric buses out to Wakefield and Motueka on a regular schedule. That will pretty much be the same bus each day, just during the run. So it'll probably be about an hour return, or a bit longer to Mott, obviously. The full fleet will be electric buses, and there will be a much simplified lower fare system and a lower and an easier charging regime, so that we can get more people out of cars onto buses. And so I accept that there is some issues around the batteries for both cars and buses, but if we can get less people on the road in cars, that's got to be a real benefit. I'll just mention, because I'm not sure if I did or not, that will be an express bus from Wakefield, because there's a lot of commuters go from Wakefield to Nelson, so it'll be an express bus through to Richmond and strategic stops on through. The other thing that I'm very keen on, and Sharon alluded to it, and which I chaired, was the walking and cycling strategy, where we'll get people once again walking and cycling in their neighbourhoods, and we've already been allocated funding for this to start in Mapura and Richmond. I think it's 1.8 in Richmond towards that, so we can get more cycleways on roads, so that we can get people out of their houses, out of their cars on those short trips, which are the ones that cause the emissions particularly. And in Mapura, it's around 600k to get some cycleways, walkways on Aranuri Road, which is the main areas. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm so looking forward to the Motueka bus, and it's pretty exciting that they're going to be electric.
It is very exciting. Our sons in Australia building the factory to build them.
Terrific. Over to David for the next question.
Yes, I think this is great news. So thank you, Stuart, for your work on the council, and everybody else for supporting these sort of things. So the next question I've slightly rephrased, because I feel we, in our previous discussion of it, we didn't quite get to the bottom of it. So it's to do with urban intensification and new subdivisions and the like. So we know that a much stronger focus on urban intensification is really vital for reducing our carbon emissions. This is most obvious in the big cities, if we can reduce the amount of extensive commuting. So our future development strategy instead provides for more large housing subdivisions on agricultural land. one of which, by the way, is going on land right in the edge of Wakefield on flat, attractive agricultural land. So what would you specifically do to make intensified urban housing a more attractive reality? What would you do to make it a more attractive reality, please? And I'm going to start by asking Sharon, if you would give us your perceptions of this from living in Tapawera, but seeing how things are in town.
Yeah, no, not a huge area of expertise for me, though I like urban intensification on brownfields. I am not happy to see those amazing Waimea plains go under houses at all, apart from the fact that they are often floodplains or drained swamps, which is great if you want to farm on it, but not so great if you want to put houses on it, because sooner or later that will come back to bite you. So yeah, no, I would prefer the urban intensification does actually happen on the brownfield sites already. All over the world, we are building on important food producing land. Certainly out in Tapawera, we envy that land over there and what they can produce. It's a whole different ball game, and you can't just go, oh, we'll build houses there and we'll go and grow food in Tapawera. It just won't happen that way. So no, that is a problem. But as far as urban areas go, definitely, you know, it's so important that they have green space. Every psychological review these days seems to say that, you know, green space is great, certainly is. Again, the cycles, ways and walkways and recreational facilities should be the centre of all of the plans for these developments. People need to want to be able to be in those areas and have most of the facilities they need within walking range. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So Stuart, what would you do specifically to make intensified urban housing a much more attractive reality?
Well, David, thank you. I think we're going down the right path now where we've altered the development contributions and fees for that so that they're more affordable for developers to do. And particularly in the Brownsfield situation, we're already seeing that to happen more, and Salisbury Road's a classic example. Drove up there today and there's a number of these happening. We've been trying to encourage people to do this since about 2005. But once we've put the financial incentive in place as a council, that seems to have made a huge difference. And also the land value is so high that people have to get a better return off it in those close to the urban centre areas, when now they're putting 10 or 12 housing units on the section which previously had one. So I think we need to keep encouraging that. I do believe that there is still a place for Richmond West type developments with some refineries. And I think the other thing we need to do in those areas is also encourage some intensification, whether that be for young people or the elderly. But yeah, so there's a whole range of needs and matching needs with demand and encouraging people to do what they may not necessarily have done in the past, because we've grown up with generations thinking they need the 3-bedroom house and a 1/4 acre section, and that slowly got smaller and smaller, but everyone still wants a freestanding house and a little bit of green around it, which is much smaller than once it used to. And maybe when you've got young families, that's what you do need. It's when you change your life or stages in your life, you look to go to more intensive cities, town centre areas, and have a different lifestyle. Yeah, I think that's about all I've got on that one. I'd actually never put my timer on.
Thank you very much. Richard will have something to say based on his experience in Sanana, where most people can still walk, but even there, this housing development's going in all over the place, as you know, Richard, including potentially up the road. So what's your approach to make intensified urban housing more attractive as a reality?
I'm sorry, David, I don't like the question at all. And isn't it funny? This is such a riot, you know. Stuart has finally said something that I don't agree with. I agree with Stuart on nearly everything for like the last 15 years, but I do not agree that we need to make urban intensive housing more attractive. I don't want next generations to grow up in cities surrounded by concrete and built open spaces. I think they're horrific. And we don't have a housing crisis. You're absolutely right, David. There's a dozen places being built in this village as we speak, all of them by extremely wealthy people who are having second and third homes. It doesn't make anything to do with affordability. I believe I'm correct in saying there are 40,000 empty houses in this country. 40,000 empty houses and 18,000 homeless people. And building more houses will not solve our problems at all. It will consume vast quantities of energy, resources, land of any sort, whether high rise or low rise or whatever. And in fact, what we really want is go back and not succumb to the latest fashions, really, which might be COVID or the Russians, or on this occasion, housing intensification, and just back off a bit and look at the bigger picture and see what is it that people are really missing. And they are missing their families, they're missing community. And in fact, where I am also standing in Greymouth, many people are bringing up their own children in the same house that their grandparents lived in and are quite happy without indoor-outdoor flow and modern amenities because they're perfectly good houses. And it's fantastic to see a community that has retained much of its fabric despite a good deal of stress. And more building will not fix it, just like bollards will not stop ram raiding. I mean, I don't know, yeah. How about that?
Fair enough. Now, I'm going to carry on with the next question. So the next question is to do with conservation. We're changing the topic. So most of you know our wonderful national parks well. Indeed, Sharon lives pretty much on the doorstep of one, as do you, Richard. And also we have lots of other Department of Conservation land, but we also have land owned or run by the council. So this is a question about council resources. So how would you support more innovative use of council land for conservation purposes? So I'm going to start with Stuart, please.
Thank you, David. Yeah, so this is one thing I'm quite keen on. We have lots of council land, particularly along river booms. So keen to see that, whether that's planted by the contractors or other volunteers. And I think, people have a bit of ownership of these areas that tends to make them care and passionate about it. The other area we're really keen to see plantings continued is along the coast and estuaries. And also we have many reserves in Wakefield, Fortners Bush and Bagents Reserve up here at Wakefield, and also Robinson's Reserves. And we've had some very passionate people in the Wakefield planting and restoration group. And those are the people we need to be encouraging to continue that work, where they've actually turned Robinson Reserve and Fortners Bush into what it once was, into really good, strong undergrowth and plantings. Once they used to run sheep in there and it was pretty average. Now it's a really attractive place for people to go. And obviously some of these will be native plantings and stuff like that. And the other thing I think we need to look at is a better planting regime on the council's forestry land, particularly in the gullies or on the boundaries where it adjoins farmland, and particularly with the events we've had of late where silt can come onto neighbouring properties. We just need to think a little more laterally about how we plant those areas. It doesn't have to be totally focused on pine. And in Richmond, we've even gone to the extreme of retiring some areas in Kingston Forest from plantation forestry, which on that steep land as a backdrop, I think is a really good thing. So yeah, continue to support those type of plantings just to protect their biodiversity in all of those areas.
Thank you. Thank you. Just before we go off to the next answer, do you want to add anything about resource consents for pine forests and what could be done there to enhance the conservation value?
Yeah, well, yes, that's a bit of a tricky one because I'm not sure you actually need a resource consent to plant a forest at the moment.
We'll come back to that on another time then. It's an unfair
Yeah.
left field question. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
We'll go to you, Richard. I would like to invite you to answer the question about use of council land for conservation purposes.
Okay. Well, I agree with everything Stuart just said, don't I? That's no good, is it? So what we see happening here, you know, beneath the surface is this is the flourishing of our intrinsic human motivation. There's nobody out there that would disagree that this is what we want to be doing. It makes sense to 11-year-olds. You know, this isn't difficult. It's taken us a bit of time to get used to the idea, but now we see it. It's so flipping obvious. And the only thing that stops us doing it in an unlimited way is, of course, the affordability and the fact that we haven't got the pretend tokens that, of course, are not real. They're just pretend. We don't have the tokens to enable it. And any opportunity for any volunteers is completely reliant upon them having the time and the energy and, of course, the money to go and take part in that. And I mean, I frequently talk about national parks. You know, I'm criticized that, oh, people don't like to share things. They want to own everything. But I do not want to own a national park. I'm very, very happy to share it. It's lovely to have one across the road and I use it frequently, but when I've finished with it, I give it back and somebody else looks after it. And it's the same with libraries and shopping trolleys, and it could be the same with autonomous cars, housing, roads, and everything else that we currently feel we have to own. Anytime there's any sort of conflict, like we're experiencing at the moment, where you want to protect an area, it comes out of monetarily productive use. If there's a conflict, it's because of money. It's not because we really have intrinsic different opinions. It's just because of money. And of course, there's conflict everywhere. So I'll leave it there. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Sharon, what's your insights on council land and what we could do to get more conservation and ecological value from them?
Well, yeah, no, I have to ditto Stuart on that one. He pretty much covered the whole shooting match. However, I would like to see more thought with, the likes of the cycleways and that we tend to plant them in exotic trees that they do provide shade, but, we need to actually have a regime of trying to bring in the understory of the natives after that, because, it's our native biodiversity we really want to focus on. So yeah, and then certainly I would like to see, actually a little bit more of the ponds and wetland restoration and reconstruction in those council areas. In regards to forestry, I think it's probably a good idea too if we actually started to really physically check that the forestries are actually following sort of industry best practice. Currently they're self-monitoring and I'm not always sure that they really are, and that would be in council areas and the commercial forestry blocks around here. Frankly, I think, Pinus radiata is probably dead. Nobody's going to buy tannalized tannalized wood in the near future. So certainly we should be thinking about Douglas, but, totara would be even better in some of those commercial forestries, and certainly a lot longer rotation to reduce the sedimentation, but that's not quite biodiversity. But yeah, no, I ditto most of what Stuart says. Plant whatever we can, where we can, reduce the spray and let the natural things do their thing.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. So, Joanna, we'll go to the next question, please.
Okay. The next question is on biodiversity, and it's on adaptation.
Yeah, I was thinking.
Scientists report that coastal inundation will occur in our district much sooner than expected, and the new findings on land subsidence have somewhat dramatically changed projections. What further specific actions should councils take in terms of adaptation, particularly in relation to coastal hazards? And I just have to think, I think we start with Richard on this one?
Yes.
Why not? And we'll see if the others agree with me. Yeah. In the long, we have to get the money out of the way. You know, it's the money that caused the climate change in the first place. It's the money that stops us changing anything of any significance to reduce the effects of climate change. And it's the money that prevents us from just moving the cities to where they need to be. It's not even difficult. We can build a gas station in Richmond like overnight. If you've got NPD money behind you, you can build it overnight. You can build a new liquor store just like that. But if you want to build something that's actually for people and for the benefit of society, suddenly, oh, we don't have the tokens, do we? And yet the building materials, the diggers, the engineering, the technology all sits there in warehouses, in our resources, and the only thing that stops us doing everything we want to is the money system itself. And if we're serious about this, that's the only way we're actually going to get out of it. Thanks.
Thank you, Richard. Now to Sharon on that adaptation question.
Coastal inundation, not my big area again, but fundamentally we can't beat the sea, and we really need to be thinking about how we can lift and move what we can, because you're not going to beat the sea, and we should have maybe been thinking about how to do that a long time ago. It's a bit late now.
We're not short of space, are we? You know, if we're a bit doubtful, let's ask some 12-year-olds. It's not that hard. You know?
We'll go to Stuart now for.
Thank you, Joanna. I think a lot of the things that I've talked about previously in previous responses around more plantings, being proactive along the coast, and strategically using plantings like we've done along the Pakawau coast. And in the odd occasion, we will have to use rock walls. I know it's much harder to get a consent for a rock wall now, but strategically to protect some people's properties or reserves, we will need to do that. But ultimately, and firstly, we usually try and start with beach push-ups and plantings, as we've done at Rabbit Island, particularly in other areas around Motueka. All of those things help. And I think the other thing we need to think about is, Richard alluded this around housing, and we've discouraged people from building houses in places like Mapua now close to the coast. But we do need, if people do want to do that, I think they need to be encouraged to build with the idea that they may well have to retreat as the climate change and the sea comes up. And if they're prepared to do that, I don't have such an issue. But if you go into blindly just go and build close to the coast, you've got to pay the consequences. So I think council has a role to encourage lateral thinking around where and how you build, so that it can be picked up and removed back if it needs to be at some stage.
Thanks, Stuart. And I'll carry on to the next question. Also on adaptation, the one we've just had has been coastal inundation with sea level rise and land subsidence. This one is the severe weather events. So we have all seen all too vividly just how costly in human suffering and finance severe weather events are becoming in the Anthropocene age. What should be done in this region to reduce local vulnerability to severe weather events? And this time we'll start with Sharon.
Oh, that's huge. In Tapawera, certainly it's flooding that's probably our biggest issue with the river course and that, and certainly we'd like to see more gravel and sensible shaping of the watercourse to allow mid-sized floods to go through rather than sort of prime us up for a big flood to really take us out. So I'd also like to see, we've got to get back onto planting the willows. I know they're not a native and don't scream biodiversity, but, get the willows in on the edges of the rivers to hold the banks together. Then you can plant your natives and your riparian strips inside that to really get a good strong hold really with the plants. also like to see in the rivers, particularly more sort of deep ponds and in the side branches, particularly to sort of mitigate that flood damage a bit. Certainly stop banks out in Tapawera are again another issue. A little bit of a debate about who owns what stop bank and what they protect. It would be kind of good if the council's engineers would actually listen to the locals a bit as far as that, because sooner or later they're going to flood the town. And on a sort of more general term, I'd like to see more dams and water holding systems. They're useful for when we actually have drought and we need water for irrigation, etc. But they also give us a huge opportunity to control floodwaters. So yeah, I would like to see more dams and smaller dams and water holding systems on the rivers. And oh yeah, and on a slightly different bent, I would like to see strategic hubs of temporary housing. A bit like they've got in Westport when they had the floods go through. Most of the time I would see these hubs actually providing RSE workers and seasonal workers with housing that's independent of their employers and agents. But in times of real crisis, they could be emergency housing for those that are flooded, etc. Housing for rebuild contractors like they are essentially in Westport. Housing for out-of-town firefighters. Again, that water holding ability I think will be important. The fire risk is going to get worse. And yeah, even and in other times, those same little hubs housing hubs I'm talking about would actually be emergency housing for those who just need to be working in an area for a while and not emergency housing, but housing that for people that are working in an area to reduce those vehicle kilometres, really. So yeah, a few ideas here.
Some interesting ideas there, Sharon. Thank you. And Stuart.
Thank you. I'm pretty much with ditto with Sharon on these, the item she talked about, the Mott River, and I think we are actually, or we're going to have a meeting this Thursday about some of the issues Sharon talked about, which is now the following week, address some of these issues around plantings, gravel extraction and flooding. Just moving on to the water storage, and I think that can really be a game changer. We're in the fortunate position of being on the Waiiti Dam, which was a much cheaper dam than the Waimea Dam. And that dam, and we're on very stony, gravelly ground here at Wakefield. In fact, some of it is old riverbed. And that dam has really saved our bacon in a number of years by enabling us to irrigate when a dry period to get us through the drought. And I think we need to be encouraging more of that all around the district. We did look at that on the Machu Picchu around 2005, and I do wonder at times if we should revisit that and look at a community scheme up there, because the Machu Picchu is a very vulnerable catchment. And I think the other thing, all of these severe weather events, we actually do have to look at where we do housing and we need to perhaps put more thought into planning of different areas and where they are. And I know that an extreme event can happen and take something out that you haven't really expected, but building on hillsides, particularly in Nelson City, can we continue to do that sort of thing as we've done? Because it does seem to come around in a cycle, and I know increasingly anecdotally, people have talked about with this flood that it happened in the 70s and early 70s, and I certainly remember that, and it's about 50 years, so it happens, it seems, or whether that's now more frequently not, who knows, time will tell. But yeah, I just think we need a bit of proactive planning on marginal areas for housing and development. And I guess that's one of the attractions of building on flat land, which has its huge disadvantages, is that you're relatively secure. So it's a real challenge to work all these things out to do the best for the community. Thank you.
Thanks, Stuart. And finally, on this question, Richard.
Oh, no. I agree with Stuart again. Yeah. I don't agree with everything that Sharon said, but you know, the dams that we've built kind of prove what we're capable of, don't we? You know, in engineering terms, what we can actually do. I'm a spokesperson and sort of point of contact for the Upper Mott Valley catchment area, so I have quite a lot to do with that group and what Joe Leyland's doing further down the valley. And our farm actually is the beginning of the Motu Pico. But the question actually was about to reduce our vulnerability, wasn't it? And of course,
Yes.
the solution is the same again. And I'm often told that, oh, these things are too hard. But when we talk about extreme weather events, you know, when I was 16, 42 years ago, I started an apprenticeship in airline aviation. And when you see what humans are actually capable of, you know, we can basically guarantee the future in airline engineering because we have good systems. It's not because the people are particularly spectacular, but we have good systems, and the systems have total integrity. And at this moment, there's about 1 million people up in the air in airliners, and they're more likely to get to their destination than we are to get home tonight. It's that safe because of those systems. So we have the capability, and it's a good deal more of a challenging environment halfway across the Pacific, flying through a storm, than it is to build some houses with lots of concrete and piles and sheet metal. So we're quite capable of having complete, perfectly full integrity built structures and environments, but we need the right systems around it. And it's nothing to do with the people, it's about the systems. So if we actually want to survive out there, we've got plenty of gravel and rock and diggers and engineering and wood and metal. We just need to have a system that actually has integrity at the end of it. This is not difficult in engineering terms at all. It's only the money system that makes it difficult. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Richard. Over to David now.
So we're now going to turn to questions from other people here at this meeting tonight. And we would invite anybody who's not put a question out to consider just typing in something on the chat, which is at the bottom of the screen. So to find it, you go to, you might need to go to where it says more on the right-hand side and click on that, and it'll take you to, at the top, chat. So you can click on chat and type something in. So it's easier for us to pick up the question if it's typed in. But as we're a small company here tonight, if you can't do that and would like to ask something, would like to raise your hand, we'll consider that too. But for now, I'd like to go to the question we do have in the chat, which is from Roger, which is to each of the candidates. Would you support the council offering landowners rate relief as an incentive for them to agree to significant natural area designations on their property? So by way of background, significant natural areas are a topic of some debate at the present, both by councils and government. So the question is, would you consider a form of rate relief to encourage more of them on land? I'm going to start with Sharon, because you might have one of these on your land already. I don't know.
Not yet, haven't let them on to identify it. Just on the significant natural areas, I actually would love to be involved with how these are actually defined, because it doesn't happen often, but I actually agree with Federated Farmers on this one, in that they should be defined by the percentage of native plants in the mix, rather than on the percentage of pasture plants. But even that's going to be a whole real ball game just to see how they are actually defined. But yeah, actually, I totally think that the council should be offering landowners rate relief at the least, actually. You know, we forget the farms around here are not very big farms. They're not very big farms at all. There's very few 10,000 hectare farms around this place. And, you know, we've got people wanting to lop off bits of land from us all over the show. And actually, it's starting to have a financial impact. And it's actually starting to have a health impact even on, some of the smaller farmers around here. We're getting pressure from every side to basically cut land off, and it is having a financial impact. So, yeah, I do think rate relief would be the very least, actually, I would give them for incentives.
So when you say cut off, I just want to clarify, by that you mean, for example, set aside in a natural area or something like that?
Yes, basically set aside out of your production land.
Yes, out of the production land.
Yeah,
Yes.
you've got little bits of every, people are coming in for all sorts of things, riparian planting, cycle trails,
It all takes
SMA.
space, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Was
it does. And most of the farms around here just are not that big. And, when you start to lose a hectare here and a hectare there, it actually starts to bite into your income.
Yes.
So, yeah, no, I do think that incentives would be a very good idea. But also how those significant natural areas are actually defined is going to be quite a
Thank you.
rigmarole. Oh, and I would say that I think it's the council or the government's responsibility to prove that it is a significant natural area, not farmers.
Yeah, that's a problem at present, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, Stuart, you mentioned earlier you have a cycle route through your property. Do you have a significant natural area reserve of sorts? What's your view on rate relief on this one?
No, we don't have any significant natural areas, and I'm not sure that there's very many within the Tapawera area, but certainly in the mayoral there is a considerable number. So I guess the first thing for me is farmers have already been asked to identify wetlands for a couple of iterations around that, and by and large they've accepted that. Some have, and there's been a process around identifying those, and by and large, as farmers have come to the party eventually, the SNAs are significantly more challenging, particularly in areas like the Mayoral. And I can assure you, standing in front of 50 angry farmers in the Merch Sports Centre trying to talk about SNAs is not a nice place to be, having been there. And they have all the arguments why it shouldn't happen. And particularly if you think about the Mayoral, where there's huge expansions of bush and really attractive areas, they do see it as a bit of a land grab, because it's, in some cases, it can be considerable areas.
Right.
There is a policy around how these are identified, and there's people independent of the council that do that. So there is some consistency around that. We've used consultants, who I forget the name of them now, to do some of this work, and also for outstanding natural features and outstanding natural landscapes. The issue with rates relief is, and in some ways I do agree with that, but someone else has got to pay the rates that are then not paid. And so you've got a redistribution of rates issue. And we haven't done that with the wetlands. Why would we do it with the SNAs? And I think my thinking is, if you have over a certain area, that you should be entitled to some relief on your farm, because it becomes quite an imposition to have, in some cases, like we're talking considerable areas, 50 or 100 acres or more in an SNA. That's a huge impact. And well, I'm not sure that any valuation takes into account now that particularly that most of them are done desktop, takes into consideration the effect that SNA has on your valuation. Some people see them as a positive, others see them as a negative, because there will be a requirement, I suspect, over time to fence them, as there is with wetlands. And also the other issue where council, we've actually had a voluntary program where people have been able to get them assessed as we go, on the understanding that they're not identified. Now, government wants us to identify them, and that is a real issue for Tasman District Council currently. In good faith, we've identified them, saying that we won't identify where they are, so that people think they have some sort of right to go over that land and look at them, view them, whatever they want to do. So that's a real issue with the government. So that's one of the reasons I advocated quite strongly. And after the mayoral meeting, where I got a loud, clear message from farmers, we don't want this in its current form, TDC has put that process on hold until we have a better understanding from government of what they want us to do and how they're going to help.
Thanks. Thank you, Stuart.
I gave Stuart a lot of latitude there because he was very much to the point and
That's right.
Delivering knowledge, sharing knowledge that was valuable to us.
Extremely valuable. Yes, I hope this is insightful, Roger, for raise the question. Now, Richard, you told me you're pretty much fundamentally changing the use of your land. Do you want to say something about protected natural areas?
Absolutely. We lost half of it already. Thanks for the question, Roger. It must be about 10 years ago, Stu, wasn't it, when the wetlands thing began?
2014, yep. So that would even.
Yeah, geez, it really was. And it's funny just listening to you guys, and it all comes back to me. So we lost probably about 10% of our farm to wetlands. I mean, we were fortunate in that it doesn't produce anything anyway. But, the mental health, thank you, Sharon, you reminded me of that. I remember a huge meeting, you were there, Stu, at the community hall.
Got another splash in there too.
Yeah, and I remember at that meeting, it was, that was a good turnout. Wow, if we could get that turnout for community hall committee meetings, it'd be fantastic. Everybody came, and some of these people come a long way. And at that meeting, there were 3 pivotal moments. One was with my neighbour immediately behind us, who, of course, has a small farm. Much of it has not been drained previously, and he lost basically the viability of his farm. And he said his piece, and then he got up and stormed out of the meeting in tears. Yeah, and I don't think that's a great outcome, No. That was I can feel it now, the emotion I felt at that meeting. The second pivotal moment was my own speech, of course, which obviously was profound. And the third thing, the third thing, and this is nearly 10 years ago, because SNAs, wetlands, etc., it's all the same thing. It is society at large trying in its twisted way via money to do the right thing. But of course, the right thing always impacts on the poor people, doesn't it? Not on the wealthy. And that happens every time. Don't get me started on that. The third thing that happened at this meeting, and I will never forget this, and I'm going to say it on record, that Malcolm McConaughey, who is an extremely respected farmer in New Zealand, globally actually, and was one of the biggest landowners up here, stood up at the end of the meeting. I will never forget this. And he said, the only person that's making any sense here is Richard Osmaston. And that's one reason I'm still doing this today, because I know we're right, and we will never get to the bottom of these things. We will destroy our beautiful society and our beautiful planet if we don't change. And my last thing is, I'd love Dawn Wetzel to get her 12-year-old daughter to come and have a question, because it will be easy for her. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed. Right. So would anyone in the audience like to put their arm up? There is a place where you can find an icon. It's called reactions on the right hand, or you can type something in the chat if you wanted to. Sharon, did you want to add something? I'm not sure whether you're scratching your head or just waiting.
Yeah, no. Not at the minute.
You're right.
Yep.
Roger, Roger Frost, on the answers you've heard, you find that informative? Do you want to ask a supplementary question at all? He's disappeared. That's what he thinks of it.
Sometimes Roger has reception area difficulties where he is, so
okay,
he may be able to hear you.
Never mind.
He's down the upper Bulla Gorge, so it's sometimes in and out.
There he is.
Yes. Is he coming back?
Well, he has his hand up, David.
Yes. Roger, please demute and speak before the gremlins get you again. You need to demute.
Unmute, Roger.
Go ahead.
No, thanks for those comments. as I just popped through a note to Stuart, I think wetlands should also be treated in the same way as SNAs, with at least rate relief as the lowest form of assistance that council can offer, and certainly if society benefits and if our community as a whole benefits, then we should expect to pay. So I guess that means higher rates, but that's part of the deal. The other thing I wanted to mention was the references to the Motueka River. When I've seen the Motueka River and when I've read about the Motueka River, it appears to carry a large amount of soil to the sea. And I wondered what can be done to reduce this, whose responsibility, and how council can help.
So, can we focus particularly on the council side, if there's an answer there? We'll see maybe if the candidates would like to answer, as this is an unprecedented question. So if you go back onto mute, Roger, I'll pose the question. So the question, as I understand it, relates to runoff on the Motueka River from floods, where it carries a lot of flood debris down. And the question from Rogers, whose responsibility is this, and what should the council do about it? So I'll start with Richard.
Great question, Roger. This brings to mind, we've been here 18 years, and the first time I saw a dock helicopter carrying gravel up a mountain, I had a little question in my mind that didn't quite go away. And my children, who were all under 10 at the time, asked, that doesn't seem that efficient, Dad, knowing a bit about airplanes, to repair the mountain, sort of, yeah, okay. So yeah, I think we might have to align with nature here, Roger, bearing in mind that process built the Waimea plains, etc. Yeah, I think we'll just let the mountains and the river do its thing, and we'd better align our society in equilibrium with that. Thanks.
Thank you. Sharon, what do you think about this issue? You will have seen, you're on near the Motueka yourself, I presume.
Yeah, no, right on it. One of our trees whipped down the river the other day and became a new island by the Tapawera Bridge.
That's whose tree it is.
It was, and it disappeared real fast.
We'll be invoicing you for that. Yeah.
On the log back. Yeah, no, I mean, the forestry takes the rap for this a lot of the time, but certainly, I mean, we are seeing the foresters now sort of thinking about how they plant in layers so that they're not harvesting it all at the same time, which is best practice, and they know it. And so the next rotation should reduce that sedimentation load, because they're not going to clear foul whole faces like they did. But like I say, they're self-monitoring, so it would probably pay for the council to actually be physically checking that these things are done. But Roger, if you've been looking at clay lately, we're having massive geoforming up here. If you come through Tapawera, they have flattened out huge amounts of land for the hop gardens. And if it rains at the wrong time when they're not covered, I mean, we had one flood last year, not very big flood, but when I've stuck my hand in the water, it was like a clay slick. And that's basically because it went straight through the middle of one of the new hop gardens that had basically just stripped off everything. So you're getting bits of stuff. Once they get more established, it's not so bad. But yeah, no, there is still quite a lot of sedimentation going down the river. But it's not all the forestry's fault, I'd have to say.
No, thank you, Stuart. And sorry, Sharon, what should the council do about this? You said they should monitor the forestry, but monitor yet land use more broadly is what you're suggesting.
Yeah, well, see, most of these big corporations and the forestries and that, they're all self-monitoring to make sure that they follow industry best practice. But, they're really great at ticking the boxes, but actually the council needs to get out there and check that they ticked the right box.
Okay, thank you. Stuart, what's your thought on this question?
Thank you, David. There's a couple of things. One of the recent innovative ideas council has done is that we now have a forestry advisor across the 3 councils across the top of the south, Brad Chandler, who is actually visiting all of these logging sites and encourage them to use best practice and sharing innovative ideas as these type of people do. We also do monitor them for best practice and some rules around soil disturbance and those sort of things. But by and large, the best larger companies, by and large, do their best to comply. But the challenge is when you have weather events like we've had, and there's no level of compliance that can cope with those sort of things. Like Sharon, in some ways, we're even closer. Our farm at Tapawera looks over on the Borlace Forest, and there's, as I talked about earlier, there's some things we need to do better, like planting the gullies and around the fringes, and we need to be encouraging the forestry companies to do that. And also, different tree crops as well. But yeah, certainly my view is that we need to be and encourage them through both best practice and compliance to be doing as much as they can to reduce sedimentation. But as Sharon said, one event taking out some land in a hot garden or a large storm after freshly harvesting, there's not a lot you can do about that, other than you think, well, why did they let that happen? Even that they were asked to not drive poles stay-wise into or near the stock bank, and then it took the stock bank out. You've just got to wonder about, and I guess that's something you see with corporate farmers rather than individuals who have a real passion and care about farming. Family type farms rather than corporate farms, which I have a little bit of a bee in me bonnet about. Thank you.
Thanks. Now, Richard, I don't know whether our rules allow children from underage voters or not.
Oh, we could probably risk it, David. Yeah. We're amongst friends here.
Do you want to paraphrase what your daughter said and explain why she's racist?
Oh, it's not my daughter, David. It's a friend in the village's daughter.
Okay. Well, okay. Just paraphrase the question, please. What would you like?
Yeah.
What would she like to know? Is she here tonight on the Zoom?
Yep. Yeah. So this 12-year-old asked, why are they taking land off people and not sharing the cost of that loss with everyone? In other words, this should be a cost for all New Zealanders, as it is a benefit for all New Zealanders.
You're talking about the protected natural areas, for example.
Yeah, or wetlands, or any of the
yes.
other. Yeah. So basically,
so basically, she's suggesting that the cost should be paid partly, at least, by the central government rather than the ratepayer.
All New Zealanders, yes.
Yeah. Well, that's through tax systems, as far as I'm aware, more or less. So we won't ask your answer on this, Richard, but you will know this already, won't you? Sharon, thoughts on this one? Should we try to
out of the mouths of babes is all I can say on that one.
Thank you.
I haven't quite got what the question is, David.
So the question is, shouldn't we be looking not only to ratepayers, but also to central government and other people? The question is, the whole of New Zealand should help pay for protected national areas. So this question, I think, this question partly came up in the context of Sharon giving us a vivid explanation by Sharon of some smallholders losing bits of land which they can ill afford to lose. So the question,
that certainly was raised by the farmers at Murchison, and we would certainly dearly love the national government, as in the central government, to pay those costs, and so that it wasn't a cost on all of our ratepayers. But ultimately, someone's got to pay, and we haven't had any luck persuading them. And it's like the wetlands that Richard had talked about. All of those things they want us to do, they also want us to pay one way or another, whether it's taxing the landowners or taxing everyone. They don't seem to come to the party at all on these environmental issues. So that's really frustrating.
Thank you.
And
you.
I actually, in fact, I'll go a little further. One of the farmers in the mayoral who had a deer farm, which are very challenging, as you can imagine, this fence of significant natural areas or wetlands, talked to Nick Smith at the time that they were in government, and Nick Smith more or less told him that's a local government problem. So that was really frustrating. He made a special trip up to talk to Nick at the market around that. So that's really just how some central government MPs see the situation.
And now he'll say the reverse. Now he's going to stand for local government.
Yeah. I hope so.
Yeah, he'll get the idea. Thank you. So I'm going to, I think, invite any final comments on.
Richard, I
the
see
issues.
there's, David, I see there's one
Would you
more
mind,
question.
David?
There's one more question in the chat, David, which is quite an interesting one about the water allocations.
Okay, I beg your pardon. Okay, this is from Kate. Thank you, Kate. I apologize for not picking it up earlier. So Kate has raised a question asking candidates about their concerns on water allocations needed to support large hop farms that are emerging in the Tapawera area. And by the way, I happen to live next door to a hop farm, which has moved to using only drip water. So it is possible to use other systems than showering covering the landscape. But anyway, I'll ask Richard, what's your views of artificial irrigation, particularly in this case, the water allocations that might be needed for this? Has to come from somewhere. That looks like an execution order there, Richard. That's what's what happened at the guillotine. Huh? What would you say about that?
I don't think it has integrity. It's not ethical to be producing more alcohol. I mean, it wasn't long ago they were producing tobacco up the road. I mean, should we go back to that? Anyone got a problem with that? Oh, let's ask our 12-year-old again. It's not very hard, is it, really? Come on, guys. Nah. Yeah, I do have a big problem with water allocations for growing alcohol. Absolutely. I'll stop.
Yes. Okay, hang on. It's not only alcohol, it's also used to irrigate apples in some locations.
There's no
Apples
money
all
in
right?
apples. There's no money in apples, David. Come on, get with the program. Yeah.
Well, no, I think that's changed, actually.
I want to go to somebody without an apple prejudice. Can you help me here, Stuart?
Thank you. Yeah, well, one of the things we don't do, other than new allocations, is actually specify the crop. And I'm not sure that that's a path we would want to go down, telling people what they can or can't grow. In relation to the water allocations, I think it's important to realise that there is no new ones. All of the hop farms, as far as I'm aware, have bought the allocations that were previously used on the property. We are still trying to resolve the matter of two contested consents from the review of the allocations on the Upper Motueka. So there is no new ones. And what you have to, as the land uses change from dairying or blackcurrants particularly, there is no difference in the water allocations to those properties unless they've been able to persuade someone to give them some else. But I think what makes it different is one thing that Richard's talked about, it's a different crop to when we were irrigating pasture for dairy cows. And also it's much more visible and it's a much more condensed period where the pasture irrigation, as Sharon will know, is much more spread over the season and tends to have a shorter peak, where the hops tend to, particularly from, if it's a really dry year, December through to March, they really ramp up the irrigating right up to their full allocation of the consent. And I think that's what people are seeing. And so that people think that there's a lot more water being used, but I think it's because it's just in that shorter period. And just in relation to the allocation available, when we get the issue of those 2 contested, there's going to be very limited but some water made available to those that are on the waiting list, and I can assure you that they are not hop farmers, the people that have been waiting for water for some considerable time. So it's all a matter about getting that sorted and just getting the whole allocation thing sorted has been quite a challenge, really. In the lower parts of below the Tapawera Bridge, there has been an increase in allocations, and some of that has gone to hops and some of it's still waiting to be used, actually.
Thank you.
Sorry, I got a bit muddled there. In the
No,
middle.
that's fine. Thank you. Sharon has been advocating building of more reservoirs and also hydro dams. So Sharon is going to be able to supply a lot more water to those hop farmers.
Well,
You
yeah,
want
I've got a couple of things to contest there a bit.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Now, Stuart, given that we've got this review finishing in 2025, and we may have to reduce the overall allocations, maybe we shouldn't be reissuing out water yet. The other one is yourself, that drip feeding is better than the spraying. Yes, it certainly is, but don't think for a second that they're not still putting out the same amount of water. And yes, Stuart, they irrigate for 4 or 5 months of the year, then almost their full allocation. We don't.
No, that was the point I was making, that they do use much more of their allocation, but across the whole catchment, it's still less than that, because there is a return that you would get where you can see that.
Yeah,
as part of the end of season.
Yeah, though the more we use through, I mean, they are maxing out their allocations pretty much every day of the
Well,
whole
I'm glad.
season.
I'm appreciative to Kate for raising this question on water allocation, because it is another environmental dimension, isn't it? And it's another dimension in use in terms of appropriate land use and sustainability. So I'm really appreciative, Kate, of you doing that. I think we're going to bring.
While we're on that one, probably when we allocate water, it should be allocated to the percentage, how much water is available, the percentage of arable land, and then you only get so much water for whatever size piece of block you've got.
Yes.
And you use it efficiently would be a good idea.
That's right.
And certainly that's what we're doing with new consents on the Waimea Dam. And in fact, they have to go further to have a farm plan and a nutrient plan and all of those, and an irrigation plan to show what area they're going to be irrigating, and also what rates. Yeah. So that's something we haven't had to do in the other catchments yet, but that may well happen, as you say, in 2025 as the whole thing's reviewed. It doesn't seem that long ago that 2015 we started the other review process.
Well, I'd like to thank Richard, you Stuart, and you Sharon for coming on tonight and sharing your insights on climate action and on the environment. And we wish you well for the remainder of the campaign, and we'll be coming to see you as soon as you're elected to
make sure everything happens.
Yeah.
We really want action on climate. We're really pleading with you. And if it means having less beer, Richard, so be it. Anyway, good. I'm going to invite Joanna to wrap up, please.
Okay, the closing karakia is one for after work has been well done together. And the metaphor is we've just been paddling a waka together on the sea, and we've landed on the beach, and we pause to reflect on what we've done together tonight. Ko te hā, ko te pō, ko tangaroa, ko te mana, ko te kotahitanga o ngā mata waka. Haumi e, hui e, taiki e.
Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Thank you, Joanna. Thank you, David. It's been very enjoyable evening, much better than I
Yeah, no,
thought.
it's been fun.
It's lovely to meet you all and all the very best.